Hi everyone, thank you for joining me. Tonight we're going to be talking about a missing persons case. Her name is LaQuanta Riley. She was born February 26, 1984. She was 19 years old at the time when she went missing. So let's go through a little bit of background about LaQuanta. She was an honor student, received a full college scholarship, honor student all throughout high school. So this was a person that was well educated and on her way to great things. This is where the details get a little sketchy as we get into more on the case. She was in Eufaula, Alabama at the time. She was living with a roommate and she got into an argument with the roommate, as young kids do. She wound up calling her mother, upset, Mom, I want to come home. I need a ride. Eufaula, Alabama to where her mother was located. Her mother's name is Pam Riley. It's about an hour and a half ride. And her mother lived in Montgomery as well as her aunt. Katie lived in Montgomery. So you have her mother Pam and her aunt Katie that lived in Montgomery, Alabama. Her mother was unable to get to her and bring her from Eufaula, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. It's an hour and a half ride. Who knows the situation? It's not detailed whether or not she had a ride there, how she got there. All it said in the reports is that she made more phone calls and she was able to get from one place to the other. Okay, so she makes it. She makes that phone call on December 5th. Okay, and from what the reports read, she actually makes it out to her aunt's house, and her aunt at the time wasn't there but did allow her to stay, and her aunt was in Georgia basically visiting family at the time that she needed to stay there, but she was more than welcome to. Her son was staying there, and so she gets there and she's with her aunt's son, and her aunt had one major rule, and the rule was no boys allowed in the house. When you have young teenagers, that is something normal that I think all parents, all family members go through. I think it's something that all adults deal with when they're dealing with young children. They just want to have their friends over, they want to have their boyfriends over. I'm sure the boys want to have their girlfriends over, but that was the one rule, and she knowing that she had to stay there, she had to abide by that rule. And maybe she thought because her aunt was away that she could bring someone in, but her aunt's son, which he's not named, he said basically no, no one's coming here, and they wind up getting into a little argument over it. It is noted that she calls her aunt, I guess, to talk about it, and her aunt's just like, you know what, no, it's okay, wait till I come back home, we'll talk about it, whatever the case may be. So basically it's the details are very sketchy here, because then this is December 7th, the day that she goes missing. A car comes to her aunt's residence, picks her up. The details of the car that comes to her residence are not known. It just says she is picked up at her aunt's residence. Her mother lived 3 miles up the road from where she lived. Okay, so from where her aunt lived. So she gets into this vehicle, she goes to her mother's house. She goes to her mother's house with the purpose of grabbing a jacket or grabbing a coat. Mind you, it's December, it's cold or getting chilly. I don't know what the weather is in Alabama, but she decided she wanted to grab a jacket. She makes it to her mother's house. And her brother wind up answering the door. Her brother answers the door, she goes in to get her jacket or coat or whatever, and her brother's like, hey, I don't recognize that car. And she's like, oh, it's just a friend of the neighborhood. And her brother's looking at it again, and he's like, who? I don't recognize. And she's like, oh, don't worry, no big deal. It's just someone from the neighborhood friend. That's basically what is being reported that she stated. She grabs the jacket, and that is the last anyone has ever seen from LaQuanta. The car that she was in, her brother did look at it because he was questioning it. So it's being described as a dark green Ford Taurus or a Chevrolet Caprice. Again, a dark green Ford Taurus or a Chevrolet Caprice. The year, make, and model is unknown. I couldn't find any information on that. So maybe it was just enough to know what the body of the car looked like. So let's go to the next part of the detail. The next detail is 3 days after that. That was December 7th. That's the last reported sighting of her with her brother, December 7th. 3 days after that, her mother reports her missing to the police. So could this be something like, okay, she's 19 years old. She can leave and come and go as she pleases. Did they take it as seriously as they should have? Probably not. 3 days later, her mother does report her missing. So a few weeks after that, her mother gets a voicemail with the caller crying, upset, saying, leave me alone or let me go home. And then the voicemail ends with the male's voice saying LaQuanta at the end. How terrifying. Her mother says it sounded a lot like her LaQuanta's voice. The police were unfortunately unable to trace the call, so they have no idea where the call came from. I guess up until this day, she has never had another phone call or anything like that. So that is so terrifying and very traumatic for a mother to hear that. Then let's go down the line a little bit. The details of this again, if this was a few months later, if this was a few weeks later, if this was a few years later, because she went missing in 2003. She went missing in 2003. So I don't know at what point, how much later did she get this voicemail, a few weeks later. And then down the line a little further, sometime after that, there was an apartment rented in her name in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And in Stone Mountain was around the same town or in the same vicinity as where she went to high school from. So she goes missing in Eufaula, Alabama. Okay, she goes from Eufaula, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama. That's an 1.5 hour ride. Okay, she gets to Montgomery, Alabama. Now she goes missing in Montgomery, Alabama. Then an apartment gets rented in her name in Stone Mountain, which brings her back to the place where she went to high school in the same vicinity. So it would have been a town that she's known and been familiar with since she went to school out there. An apartment gets rented in her name. So of course, the police get wind of it. Her mother gets wind of it. And from what I know, the mother gets there and basically says, with the picture, hey, does anyone, know my daughter? Have you seen my daughter? A man comes out, a man that was living at the residence for 2 years. And he basically says, yeah, I know her. She's lived here. He lived down the hall from her. He identified her and said that she had to use his cell phone a few times to make a phone call, when she got into an argument with whoever she was staying with. And not only that, that she just moved out a few days ago. So her mother had just missed her by a few days. Now, if this is true, could this be another person that looks like her? A person that kind of looks like her that was positively identified in a photo. Also, an apartment with her name. I want to say chances are that probably was her. Now, this is where the police stuff, I don't understand. It takes a social security number to rent an apartment. It takes identification to rent an apartment. It takes pay stubs, security, money, lights, gas, utility. It takes a lot to rent an apartment. So whose name was her stuff in? Did they find anything in the apartment? Who knows? Another thing with the police that her mother was stating was that the fact that they didn't do a search of her aunt's house, they didn't trace any of the phone calls or attempt to. So there's a lot of police work that didn't get done for the most part. And it shows, because I feel like this could have been solved. If it wasn't able to be solved then when she went missing, but surely when the apartment came in her name, something, whether video cameras anywhere in the vicinity, anywhere around, to anything that maybe matched the car that, she was picked up in, anything, any information, who knows? So the police really didn't do a good job at that. Her mother does agree with the fact that she doesn't think that they did enough. She's been known to speak on that. As well. Her mother has also been reported, pretty much saying that she beat herself up for that December 5th phone call because she did call her mother upset, wanting to leave from Eufaula to Montgomery, and her mother didn't ask her why. What was the altercation? What happened? What made you upset? Her mother feels as if, had she had asked those questions, she would have not necessarily known where she disappeared to, but she would have had a little bit more of insight in her life as to what was going on at the time around her disappearance. So that could have helped, but I'm here to say would have, could have, should have. There are things that I do with my son daily that I should have done differently. That's a part of parenting, no matter how old they are. We are humans, we are not perfect, and God knows that. So I hope she doesn't beat herself up over it. I know it's hard not to, because that is a key thing in this case, what was going on at the time. You also have these long trips, from Stone Mountain, where the apartment is rented in her name, all the way to Montgomery, where she went missing, is 2.5 hours. So you have a 2.5 hour ride from where she went missing to where she currently was at the time, allegedly, I guess. I don't know if that's ever been reviewed by the police or checked out. I mean, it's crazy to me that they believe something so big unturned. But her mother has been getting support. She was introduced to a nonprofit organization called Project Jason. It is an organization that helps families that have people that have gone missing. So they hold vigils for LaQuanta. They also release balloons on her birthday. So her mother is getting the support and helping other people find peace in what's happening and just showing support. So she's helping others and she's getting that support for herself, which is wonderful. As far as the police goes, I have read that they have assigned a new detective to the case to look at everything with a fresh set of eyes. And I hope that, you know, it's 2021 now. This is the latest I've read, February 2021. So I'm hoping that, you know, it's just some common sense things here that help put this case and close it. It's an unfortunate thing. People go missing all the time. You have this young lady that has her whole life ahead of her, that is smart, that is bright, that is bubbly, that has friends, that has family, and what happened? You know, and I was reading also that and I wanted to point out that her mother wants her to know, no matter what argument you've gotten into, whatever you've come through, you know, in your life, it is fine. Please come home, and you always will have a home. So let's say her name again, LaQuanta Riley. The database for missing and exploited children has submitted an age progression photo of LaQuanta, and here's what she would look like today. Hopefully there is someone out there that has some information. There's no bit of information that is too small. So please give the Montgomery Police Department a call and let's help bring her home. If you have any information on the whereabouts of LaQuanda Riley, please contact the Montgomery Police Department at 334-215-STOP. You can choose to remain anonymous and contact them at 334-262-4000.